Iñigo Manglano-Ovalle.
What?
And he's an artist originally from Spain who lives in and works in Chicago.
Iñigo.
And I happen to study with him as my professor at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And Iñigo and I pretty immediately became quite close. There were a lot of parallels and similarities and overlappings and disagreements between our work. But this is a piece, I'm not sure when this is from. Oh, I'm just looking for the year. It's from 2001. So this is like, yeah, right around the time I met him, I think. And it's called Search. And you knew him in grad school?
Yeah, I knew him in grad school. I wasn't in grad school with him. I'm a bit older than him. So, but he was a young student when I was a working artist in Chicago. But one of the things I should say, just an overview of the show. The show actually is very unique. I've never seen a show like this before. Essentially, it's a survey of artists since the 60s, starting with June Paik, a very, very famous video artist, actually the first person to ever, first private individual ever to own a camcorder. It's called Quarterpack back then. It's about this big, you wore it like that, and had a giant camera. But anyway, it's a survey of artists who utilized the media or intervened in the media since the 60s, and we have people, well, June Paik is sort of our representative from the 60s, and the next person, Chris Burton, moves into the 70s, TVTV over there is in the 70s, and we move through the 70s, into the 80s, into the 90s, I'm sort of the 90s guy, and then into the knots of this next century, and Iñigo and Siebren and neurotransmitter. They are sort of the representatives of the last decade.
So talk about this piece. It's
Sure. Basically,
you're hearing part.
well, one of the concurring themes in Iñigo's work, I think, is form. I mean, in many ways, I think it refers to the idea of form and its relationship to artwork throughout the ages, and form's ultimate folding into architecture and the idea of the architecture of spaces. In this particular piece, he turned the architecture of a bullfighting ring into a giant radio telescope that is essentially searching for alien radio signals. I'm not exactly sure scientifically how many thousands and hundreds of thousands of miles it searches, but I think it was only up for maybe a week or so in Tijuana, Mexico. And the sound that you're hearing ambiently here is the signal, which is essentially just the white noise, the feedback, and the little serendipitous artifacts of a radio telescope that is looking for radio signals into outer space. Were we to hear, or he or anyone at the time that he made that piece, hear some other blip or some other what's the word? Spike in the sound, it might signify the presence of radio signals from another life form. So I think obviously part of the piece, since Tijuana is so close to the United States border, was the idea of what the idea of the alien means in language, you know. And there's a bit of an ironic twist, of course, on that, it being so close to the United States border and it having taken place in Mexico.
No, I thought that was wonderful.
Let's go. So you can sit in each one of these classes.
This is the last 10 minutes of 1977. That's the best way and the most succinct way to present it. And it's broadcast from, they're recorded broadcasts from 3 different stations, one in Germany, one in the Soviet Union, and one in the United States.
And you can sit at any one of the stations and it'll flip through each of these last segments of that particular broadcast.
And does everybody know about Chris Burton? We just walked through him. Chris Burton's piece, there's a series of commercials that were actually aired on television in New York and also in LA. He received a grant and bought commercial time and produced his own commercials. There's one of those, I don't know which is coming up next.
Compares himself to Picasso.
Yeah, there's one. It's a very short commercial, but it says like Michelangelo, Picasso, Da Vinci, Chris Burden. And then on the other side is a pretty famous piece that he did, where he was interviewed on a art talk show in 1972 in LA, and it's called TV Hijack. And basically what he did, it was a live broadcast, and during the interview, the interviewer asked him, what are some of the ideas you've been thinking about? And he said, well, I've been thinking about hijacking a television program. And he got up, pulled out a knife, held it to the throat of the interviewer, and then proceeded to demand the tape. And he had his own video crew there. And back then, people were a lot less afraid, so nobody really panicked. A few people were nervous, but they videotaped him getting the tape of the actual show, destroying the tape, and that was the piece. For me, in my education, Chris Burden was a major influence in my work, and so I actually am very, very pleased to be showing with Chris.
You know, any one of these artists, this is a show that really requires some time looking at each of the pieces and thinking about it. And if you are curious about Chris Burden, who's a very famous performance artist, did a lot of things that are kind of right back in vogue today, if you've been reading about Marina Abramovic's exhibition at MoMA, but kind of enduring self-inflicted pain to the extent that he once shot himself in the arm, right? And as part of a performance. And so this sort of way of operating as an artist, this sense of intervention, so you're actually, and that's a theme that moves through this exhibition, where the artists are actually creating an intervention, or at least framing some aspect of the media for you to consider what the media does to you, I guess.
Yes. And it's also, artists expanding their voice, utilizing the media as a way. All of us artists, we're really like, it's a dialogue, where it's communication, we're talking to you, the audience, and utilizing the media as a way to expand our voice and to reach more people. Dara Birnbaum, she is a political artist. She's been around since the 60s, 70s.
Please a little more slowly and distinctly.
Sure. Sure. Dara Birnbaum is actually a quite important famous artist. She's been around since the 60s and 70s. She's experiencing a huge resurgence of her career right now. This particular piece is about the Baader Meinhof group in Germany in the 70s. And when they had captured one of the leaders of the terrorist group. And it includes various news footage, and if I remember the whole story right, I'm really not prepared to talk about all of this. And by the way, Irene has done a cell phone tour of the show that is really, really, really excellent. And I highly suggest that you do that. It'll be much better than Siebren and I sort of ad-libbing this. But the piece itself when in its original incarnation was actually very groundbreaking in the amount of technology that it utilized. Right now it's not operating. Well, actually it's operating. But if everybody moves out of the center. They begin playing. But it utilizes various news footage from 1977. And specifically, one of the structures of the piece is when you walk across this laser beam, the whole thing stops. In other words, you've killed the show, and you'll notice that over yeah.
Well, I think a lot of it was about the idea of implicating the viewer. I mean, to actually have your physical presence have some reverse effect. I mean, we think often, I think, in terms of broadcast media as a wash that only comes down to us and what is our relationship to it or can be affected. And I think in this piece, I mean, in many ways, like Rick said, maybe now technologically primitive to us now, but it was a way to like have the viewer have some sort of voice control, but at the same time be like implicated. And also implicated, of course, by the implicit violence of the story that it's telling.
So that the viewer becomes a victim.
Exactly.
Yes.
A victim, but also an author. Like, so, like, what is? I mean, that becomes a really interesting question. Is it possible to be an author without being a potential victim? You know, to put yourself in harm's way is the same thing as to state something, to talk in front of a bunch of people. You know? I mean, those two things become very tied in together. And here it can. But this is, I believe he's Swiss artist. His name is Christian Jankowski. And I first heard about Christian Jankowski's work from a video that he made in the early 90s where he went into a supermarkets and was shooting turkeys with a bow and arrow as if he were going hunting. So it was sort of I think a comment on like the mediation of the experience of life in general. This is a piece that he made, I'm not sure what the date is, I think it's the late 90s or early 2000s, but he was invited to be a part of the Venice Biennale. He went there not knowing at all what he wanted to or was planning on doing, wasn't sure at all about what he might do, and decided while he was in his hotel room one night, he realized that there was a really large presence of these televised psychics that you could call in. Everybody remembers, what is her name, the Jamaican woman? Call me now. What is her woman? Miss Cleo. Miss Cleo, yes. So this is like Italy, Miss Cleo. But in Italy, there's not just Miss Cleo, there's like apparently like hundreds of televised psychics. So basically what he did is he just called and with his most anxious and earnest anxieties about how and what he was going to be doing for the Venice Biennale, he called these psychics and asked them how it was going to go. And simply rebroadcast, translated this, and showed this at the Biennale in that year. I think it's a wonderful and really entertaining piece, obviously.
The date on it's 1999.
99, so I was close. But a lot of fun. I'm not sure how long it is, but I think I remember when I watched it the first opening, I was there for at least a half an hour. It's a long piece.
22 minutes.
22 minutes. Close. So there's probably like at least 5 or 6 hours worth of video watching. I mean, to really absorb this show, I would recommend coming in here and spending the day, spending the afternoon. Bring some popcorn.
Neurotransmitter is an artist collaborative of 2 people. It's Valerie Tavera and Angel Neveras. They've been working together for ages. Their work is actually in some ways related to my work. It's about the power of the media and putting the media back into people's hands. This piece called Frequency Allocation originally started out with about the FCC coming in and selling off different frequencies, and basically primarily selling frequencies to major corporations, primarily Clear Channel, and essentially in a democracy, when you have a monopoly over media, you have a monopoly over information, and thus you are undermining democracy. This particular video is some documentations of some actions that they did during 2004 Republican conventions in New York City. They participated in the protests, and they used backpacks with low-power FM transmitters, and they went along with the protests and broadcast their own protests and also did interviews of people on the street, basically empowering the people through the media. And all of their work is about those sorts of issues. And I think that's a pretty quick introduction. That's Valerie right there. She's a wonderful, wonderful, sweet woman. When I first met her, I had a crush on her. But if you didn't notice, she was actually wearing the backpack. Oh, here's the backpack right here. This chart right here is essentially just a breakdown of the broadcast media allocations, and these are free posters that you can take with you. That is a drawing of them with backpack and other sorts of stuff. But I don't know what else to say about it right now.
No, I think that's clear.
That's clear?
Yeah. I mean, I think this map is a really interesting thing to look at and think about. I mean, we think about real estate in such tangibles oftentimes, but there are all these intangible real estates and properties that are owned, that we navigate through every day, that are really easy to forget that they are turned into capital. And obviously, I mean, this, clearly states that. I think cell phones get up here, though. I think this might be like before, right? This radio spectrum is different.
Yeah, this is more the radio spectrum.
Yeah.
So.
Anyway.
Actually, if you turn around, this is the earliest work in this show by June Paik. I mentioned him earlier, being the first private individual to ever have a video camera. And this is some of his very first explorations with the camera itself. So, and a lot of his work has been, literally, okay, you put a new tool into an artist's hands, and the artist tries to figure out how they can manipulate it, how they can use it outside of its normal purposes to create an aesthetic and experience that also goes beyond that. In this particular piece, he's working with different political broadcasts and altering them and sending them through different sorts of systems to distort them and change them. This is in some ways...
I think the best way to think about this piece, it's like a really early predecessor to DJ remixing.
Yeah.
Or to the mashup. I mean, it's so common to us and so understood that we can take information from any of these places, sort of remix it, make our own work on it. I think at this time, what is this, like 60...
This is 67.
67. Much more of an unheard of kind of practice, and certainly a lot more provocative in a way than it would be thought of today. So I look at it as a really, like it's a pioneering piece. It's a really historical.
Yeah, very, very groundbreaking. He was the first artist to ever work with video.
And obviously what he's doing is playing with the horizontal and vertical hold on his television set, probably while a live broadcast is going on, and manipulating that by rebroadcasting it, recapturing it with the camera, and then presenting that as art. I mean, that's the other thing, is to pull that video broadcast signal, then call it your own art. I mean, that's a really pretty, I don't know. It's pretty large, statement to say that you can just take information right off of a television and call it your own art.
Yeah. In a way, the first act of appropriation.
Right.
And appropriation art became sort of
the
a
broadcast signal.
Yeah. And appropriation art became a major movement in the 80s. So he was a precursor to many, many, many things. So,
but then also a follower to someone like Duchamp, who was appropriating but with objects.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. This piece is called WCBS, Radio Caroline, 99.1 FM, the voice of the new free state of Caroline. This is basically a pirate radio station. We're broadcasting on the university grounds. It's an open forum that's available to any student to come and sign up, and they can broadcast whatever they want. There's no curatorial agenda in terms of the material that people can broadcast. They can have discussions, they can play music, they can make noise, they can broadcast silence, they can dance on the radio if they want. It's just anything you want. I've been doing these pieces since 1993. It was the first radio station I've done. I've also done television stations and also large mobile works that had radio stations, television stations, and also hooked up to the internet. All of my work is about different strategies of empowerment, strategies of empowerment that are available to individuals or groups around the world to have a voice in their society and to participate in the cultural dialogue of the day and the political and social dialogues. And my work has explored all sorts of different strategies, from the utilization of violence to organizing groups and alternative systems, to the media, which this particular piece is. And we have to acknowledge that the media is one of the most powerful voices in our world today. And in many ways, over the last 20, 30 years, we've been seeing what's the right word? A takeover of the media by a few companies, Clear Channel to be one. And in a democracy, the voice of the people is the most important thing in maintaining democracy. And so this piece is basically about the idea of putting the media back into the hands of the people and reinforcing and bringing our democracy back to where it should be, back to the democracy of the people rather than a democracy of corporations. So that's what this piece is about. And I've done, this is probably the 38th radio station I've done. And in about almost that many cities as well in the United States and Europe. And so that's it. Oh, and I've got a little free handout here, right down there, if you want to take this. This is from online, print out from online, that basically tells you how you can be your own broadcaster.
This is my piece in broadcast. Most of my work comes from experiments that I do with digital programming. I became involved in programming really on the job just after I finished my undergrad degree in art school. It was a good time because of the dot-com boom with some creative skills to be able to get a job, and I quickly became immersed and interested in programming. That led to me becoming a pretty decent programmer, both for my employer, but eventually those experiments became my artwork and the essential basis of the questions that I ask in the work that I make. One of the things that experiments with programming led me to was dealing with broadcast information as understood on the internet. Around this time when I made this piece, CC, I was just becoming acquainted with the idea that people were posting their journals on the internet for anyone to read, which to me completely flipped my whole understanding of the idea of a diary or a journal as being sort of a private space. But I think perhaps the only reason we think about a journal, or the reason it was conflated to be a private space, had to do with that people didn't have the opportunity or the means to broadcast these journals. I was also making a lot of work that was using live information that was coming out of the internet and being reformatted to appear in the gallery situation as if it were a closed channel video. So a closed channel video system is a video that is looping every time it loops around, like the Christian Jankowski or any of the videos in the show. Every time they loop around, it's the same piece. You can see it from beginning to end. On a formal level, I was really interested in the potential for programming to allow for an open timeline, an infinite timeline. So with this work, what you're seeing is closed loops that are broadcasters from several different news stations that I taped back in 2003. But over the top of it, as if it were closed captioning, that material, that textual data is coming directly from the internet, indiscriminately pulling people's live diaries off of the internet, the most recent ones being first. One of the things that also became interesting to me is, yes, in many ways it becomes just jabber. I mean, these people are talking about their, prosaic things that are happening in their lives. But when a global or an event that is newsworthy and affects people, that also gets broadcast through this piece, because it's something that is actually affecting people's lives. So I really like the way that this piece kind of acts as a monitor to how much the news media or events going on outside the private sphere are affecting people's personal lives, considerations, etc. It's called CC, and it's running from a computer that's hidden, and the computer is connected to the internet, and the code on the computer grabs the code. I write scripts that grab the code from different people's journals. they don't know that I'm using that, but the way I see it is that if I'm allowed to read something on the internet, then I can write a program that also reads something on the internet. So, yeah.
How do you deal with copyrighted material?
Which copyrighted material?
Well, that's copyright.
I don't. I mean, I see the appropriation of material as being artistic license. I mean, I think that 100 years ago people would paint what they saw and draw what they saw, and I do the same.
YouTube, all up there. I want for you to gather about the show. Brochure.